I saw the proof on her phone. Years of betrayal, neatly stored in pictures. I left, silent. The past followed me, and I had no choice but to face it. Brent woke in the apartment on the top floor of the old building in Denver, Colorado, to a January morning wrapped in cold. The snow fell slowly outside, muffling the distant hum of traffic and the occasional bark of a dog. But inside his head there was only a hollow silence. The night before had shattered him. On his wife Katie's phone, he had seen the images, evidence of years of deception meticulously hidden behind her smiles, their evening walks and quiet dinners. Each photograph felt like a knife of ice, piercing deeper than he expected, cutting through years of trust and routine. He lay in bed longer than necessary, staring at the ceiling. The peeling paint, the cracked plaster, the familiar stains on the carpet. All of it seemed alien, as if the apartment itself had turned against him. The coffee cup on the counter, still half full from the night before, caught his eye, but even its warmth could not reach him. Memories flickered. Laughter in the kitchen, birthdays, shared mornings, and quiet evenings. They all now felt like illusions, carefully staged lies that had lulled him into complacency. Every item in the apartment, his worn jacket on the chair, her scarf draped over the couch, their framed photographs, was suddenly foreign, tainted by betrayal. Brent moved silently, methodical but hollow, collecting clothes, toiletries, and essentials. He left behind the documents, the keys, the small tokens of life they had built together, arranging them neatly on the table, a final gesture of closure without ceremony. Even the bed, once a place of comfort, seemed to recoil at his presence. He dressed slowly, each movement precise, detached, as if his body were moving through habit rather than choice. In the garage, his Dodge Charger was covered in frost. The cold bite of the metal under his fingertips a reminder that the world outside awaited, indifferent to his pain. He slid into the driver's seat, the smell of old leather and motor oil familiar and grounding. He started the engine, listening to the low growl, feeling the vibration through the steering wheel, and for a moment, it anchored him. As he drove through the snow-covered streets, the city blurred past. Streetlights reflected off ice and snow, turning asphalt into liquid silver. Each turn of the wheel, each mile, was a separation from the life he had known and a tentative step toward a world he could not yet see. A future that promised nothing but demanded everything. Brent's thoughts were empty and full at once, a paradox that left him both numb and alert. The apartment, Katie, the life they had shared. All were collapsing behind him. The snow fell steadily, erasing footprints and tire tracks, as if the city itself conspired to cleanse the path before him. He did not look back. He could not. The distance grew, and with it, a fragile sense of freedom, bitter and sharp, took root in the spaces where grief and betrayal had emptied his chest. Brent drove west, leaving Denver behind, crossing the snow-streaked mountains of Colorado and the barren stretches of Utah. He deliberately avoided main highways and familiar towns, preferring the quiet, isolated roads where the radio was mostly static and the only company was the hum of the engine. Nights were spent in cheap motels, the thin walls offering privacy but little comfort. He ate simple meals, sometimes microwave dinners, sometimes sandwiches from small convenience stores, the food functional and unremarkable, as if sustenance were merely a ritual to maintain motion rather than pleasure. Most of his hours passed behind the wheel, his mind a theater of fractured memories and half-formed resolutions. With each mile, the grip of the past loosened. Thoughts of Katie, once suffocating, now appeared at the edges of consciousness like distant echoes. The betrayal had once been a weight pressing into every moment, but now it receded, replaced by a quiet, cold determination. Solitude became both shield and burden. Brent learned to inhabit silence without panic, to measure time by the rhythm of the road, by the slow shifting of mountains and mesas in the rearview mirror. He began to notice details he had ignored before. The subtle changes in landscape, the sharp scent of desert air after a snowfall, the pale light of dawn spilling over the horizon. His life before the escape. The job at the engineering firm, long hours of technical calculations, the polite smiles of colleagues, felt increasingly unreal. He thought of the ambitions he had once clung to, the promotions and projects that had defined him, and realized they were threads tied to a life he no longer wanted. Friends he had spent years cultivating now seemed like weights he could shed without consequence. Each town he passed, each gas station or diner he bypassed, was a reminder that he no longer belonged to the world he had known. Utah's desert landscapes imposed a strange clarity. The mountains rose like frozen sentinels, the plains stretched endlessly, and the wind carried the scent of stone and sand. In the vast emptiness, Brent felt a paradoxical relief. The destruction inside him found an echo in the barren beauty around him. Ruin and potential existed simultaneously, inseparable in the stark light of the midday sun. The clarity was harsh, almost painful, yet it was real. He did not pretend that the scars of betrayal had vanished. They lingered in the taut muscles of his shoulders, in the steady thrum of his heartbeat, in the tight knot in his chest. But there was a subtle liberation in the knowledge that he could endure it, that he could move forward without the anchor of a life that had been a lie. Days merged into nights, nights into days, and the road became both his path and his refuge. He observed the way his body adapted. The hours spent driving sharpened his attention, honed reflexes, and gave him a sense of control that had been absent in his former life. Alone, unobserved, he tested the limits of his patience, his focus, and his endurance. Each solitary night in a motel room, each long stretch through the desert, was a rehearsal in self-possession. Brent realized that escape was not merely a matter of distance. It was the careful, deliberate dismantling of attachment, the cultivation of a mind unshaken by others' actions, the creation of an inner autonomy that was impervious to betrayal. In the silence of the desert, amid the cold and the wind, Brent felt the faintest stirrings of something like hope. Not a naive hope, but a recognition that life, stripped to its essentials, could be reshaped. The old self was gone, fractured and scattered like the snow in Colorado. The man moving through Utah's desolate expanses was new, tentative yet resilient, aware of loss but capable of endurance. For the first time in years, he sensed that he could navigate the world alone, that he could inhabit his own mind without fear, and that the long road ahead, though uncertain, was his to claim. In Las Vegas, Nevada, Brent discovered a neglected industrial building on the outskirts of the city. Its walls were cracked, the floor coated in dust and oil stains, and the air smelled faintly of rust and mildew. He saw potential where others saw decay. He cleared the space, repairing broken windows, sanding the metal surfaces, and setting up workbenches that became extensions of his own hands. Each bolt he tightened, each panel he polished, reminded him of the precision he had once valued in engineering, now reclaimed in a tangible, immediate way. The tactile rhythm of work, grinding, measuring, aligning, lifting, re-established a sense of control that his life had lacked since the betrayal. Brent immersed himself entirely in the workshop. He worked 12 to 14 hours a day, the echo of metal striking metal and the hiss of air tools filling the quiet spaces around him. The city outside pulsed with neon lights, blaring signs, and constant motion, but Brent barely noticed it. His world had contracted to the walls of the workshop, the scent of gasoline, the oil-slick floors, and the rising clatter of machinery. Every project demanded focus, patience, and discipline. Each classic car that entered the workshop was a problem to solve, a puzzle of rusted metal and worn components, and solving it brought a quiet, private satisfaction. In those hours, solitude was no longer a burden but a framework. Brent avoided unnecessary contact, declined invitations, and stayed away from crowds. Faces blurred past him in Las Vegas, and he felt no need to engage. The opinions of others mattered less than the precise execution of a task. He became attuned to small details: the smoothness of a freshly sanded hood, the perfect alignment of a wheel, the faint hiss when a restored engine first roared. These measurements, these physical truths, were absolute, unlike human trust or betrayal. The workshop became a sanctuary, a place where order could be imposed on chaos, and Brent's own fractured sense of self could be carefully reconstructed. Slowly, the fruits of his labor drew attention. Local car collectors, initially cautious, began bringing vehicles to him, intrigued by the meticulous quality of his work. Word spread quietly through Las Vegas, not by marketing, but by the reputation of precision, reliability, and thoroughness that Brent had cultivated. Each restored car became a testament to his regained competence. Each satisfied client an indirect acknowledgement that he had rebuilt something lasting out of the wreckage of his previous life. Yet Brent did not seek admiration. He measured satisfaction by the standards he set for himself. Completion, accuracy, and attention to detail became his only validation. The discipline of the workshop reshaped him. He learned to manage his own moods and impulses, finding that physical labor and mental focus could quiet the storms of anger, grief, and betrayal that had once consumed him. He discovered rhythms in the day that had nothing to do with social conventions. The slow warming of metal under a torch, the soft click of a tightened nut, the way sunlight filtered through dusty windows at noon. Brent recognized patterns in himself, habits of thought and action that could be refined and controlled. In the silence and structure of work, he began to feel an internal alignment he had not known since before the betrayal. Brent's identity shifted imperceptibly but completely. The past existed as a distant shadow, occasionally flickering at the edges of thought, but the present was concrete, filled with measurable achievements. He no longer required approval or attention. Satisfaction emerged from mastery and completion, from projects executed with precision and dedication. Every day in the workshop strengthened both skill and self-possession, forging a new life that was deliberate, contained, and unassailable. In this way, Las Vegas, with all its chaos and brightness outside, became a backdrop to a personal reconstruction, a city in which Brent could quietly, rigorously rebuild himself from the inside out. In the spring of 2014, Brent was in the workshop when the bell above the door rang, announcing the arrival of a visitor. A young woman entered, carrying a small backpack, her movements cautious but purposeful. Behind her, a 5-year-old boy clutched her hand, his eyes wide and curious, taking in the expanse of machinery, the smell of gasoline, and the quiet hum of tools. Brent immediately recognized something familiar in the boy's stance. The way he shifted his weight from one foot to the other, the subtle tilt of his head. A wave of conflicting emotions surged through him: anger, disbelief, and an unexpected, almost uncomfortable stir of recognition. As he studied them, Brent learned quickly that the woman was Sophie, connected to a past he had believed was long buried. The boy, Evan, was the unforeseen consequence of a life he had never fully known, a secret thread that linked his former existence to the present. Brent watched their movements with careful attention, noting the patterns and habits that reminded him of himself, small gestures that suggested inherited mannerisms, a reflection of his own body language condensed into a child. There was a tension in the air, subtle but constant, a mixture of caution and expectation. The days that followed were structured in the rhythm of work. Sophie allowed Brent space, stepping back while he directed small projects in the workshop, sanding panels, assembling components, painting surfaces. Evan shadowed Brent, tentative at first, fascinated by the machinery and the deliberate, precise motions of his new guardian. Brent found himself observing the boy's approach to tasks, noticing how he tried to imitate exact angles, the careful pressure of hands on tools, the unsteady but determined motions that mirrored his own early habits. A slow understanding emerged, unspoken, between them. Each day presented a delicate balance. Brent confronted his own anger, the lingering bitterness of past betrayal, and the unsettling awareness of responsibility that had no precedent in his carefully reconstructed life. The presence of the child disrupted the order he had meticulously maintained, yet simultaneously offered a new focus, a way to channel discipline and attention beyond himself. Sophie maintained a quiet distance, allowing Brent to navigate these dynamics, providing only what was necessary and leaving space for relationships to develop on their own terms. The connection with Evan was gradual, unhurried, and fragile. Brent measured every interaction, aware of the thin line between guidance and intrusion, between discipline and encouragement. He noticed the boy's reactions to subtle instructions, the way he responded to correction without resentment, and the flashes of pride in completed tasks. There was a strange mixture of familiarity and novelty in every moment. Recognition of traits he saw in himself, yet the reality of the boy's independence, his own influence limited by age and circumstance. Brent's internal landscape shifted in these weeks. The workshop remained a controlled environment, but it now contained a human element he could neither predict nor fully command. Each day was a negotiation between past wounds and emerging responsibility, between private grief and the cautious shaping of new bonds. He discovered an unexpected patience within himself, a willingness to observe before acting, to teach without imposing, and to allow small, incremental trust to take root. Through shared labor and the quiet passage of days, Brent began to understand that this encounter was more than a disruption. It was an initiation into a different form of rebuilding. The meticulous care he had applied to metal and paint now extended to human life, to gestures, responses, and the subtle rhythm of attention. In Evan's presence, Brent experienced the simultaneous pull of loss and the possibility of connection, a complex interplay that challenged every certainty he had cultivated in isolation. Every completed project, every small success with the boy, became a measured victory, a sign that reconstruction could extend beyond himself, into the fragile, unpredictable terrain of human relationships. By the end of 2015, Brent no longer perceived the past as a source of pain. The images of betrayal and lost years still lingered at the edges of memory, but they had lost the power to dominate his thoughts. Evan's existence was no longer a shock or a disruption. It had become a concrete part of his life, a responsibility he met with careful attention and growing affection. Brent observed the boy in quiet moments, noticing the way his small hands approached tasks with methodical precision, the tilt of his head when puzzled, the occasional mischievous spark that surfaced despite discipline. Each gesture became a link, a subtle reinforcement of the bond forming between them. Sophie gradually stepped back, entrusting Brent with the boy and the framework for a life that demanded independence. Her absence was not emptiness but space for Brent to act, to shape routine, to define boundaries and nurture without interference. Each morning began with a careful assessment of priorities. Projects in the workshop, tools in place, and the quiet observation of Evan's readiness to engage. Small victories accumulated, often unnoticed by anyone else. A sanded panel polished to exact specification. A repaired engine running smoothly. Evan successfully following instructions without hesitation. Brent measured progress not in words but in precise, visible outcomes, both mechanical and human. He discovered that the act of acceptance was not passive. It required patience, restraint, and deliberate engagement. Emotional restraint became a conscious choice, letting the boy explore, make mistakes, and grow, while maintaining order and discipline. Brent realized that the past could not be rewritten, but present actions carried the weight of moral consequence. Care, attentiveness, and quiet guidance replaced anger and resentment. In this environment, the concept of justice shifted inward, rooted not in punishment but in responsible, deliberate construction of life. Through shared labor, Brent began to experience a new form of satisfaction. Evan's first independent project in the workshop, a small model engine assembled with hesitant but careful hands, elicited a quiet pride that Brent had never associated with personal achievement. The boy's laughter, subtle questions, and careful observations became markers of progress, evidence of meaningful connection. Brent noted these signs with precise attention, cataloging them mentally as milestones in both Evan's development and his own transformation. Solitude, once a refuge from pain, became a conscious selection. Brent chose the hours of focus, the quiet early mornings, the methodical routine, all structured to accommodate attention to another life. He found that moral resilience emerged not from confrontation or anger but from action, through care, responsibility, and the deliberate shaping of environment and behavior. Each day offered tangible proof of growth. The workshop organized, projects completed, the boy learning, observing, and adapting. In these routines, Brent discovered emotional depth without chaos. The controlled environment of labor and teaching allowed space for reflection and connection. The once isolating walls of the workshop transformed into a home, a place of safety, order, and purpose. Evan's presence catalyzed a shift in perception. Joy was found in small successes, in shared silence, in quiet observation of a young life unfolding. Brent internalized a lesson that had been absent in years of solitude and anger. That closeness could be built incrementally, deliberately, and that care itself was a moral act, a construction of stability from the fragments of the past. By the close of the year, Brent's life was structured, deliberate, and internally coherent. Each project completed, each careful interaction with Evan, each maintained boundary and consistent routine contributed to a sense of completeness. Acceptance was not a momentary revelation but a continuous process, reflected in daily action. The workshop remained a center of activity, a laboratory for discipline and precision, but it also became a sanctuary for growth, connection, and purpose. Brent had learned that real strength was measured not by isolation or control over others, but by the patient, deliberate cultivation of order, care, and human bonds. In this realization, he found not only stability, but also the quiet satisfaction of a life reclaimed and reshaped. By 2016, Brent had fully redefined his existence. The workshop, once a solitary refuge of labor and focus, had evolved into a small family business, attracting clients from across Nevada and occasionally beyond. Each restoration project carried with it a quiet rigor. Every bolt tightened, every panel polished, every engine calibrated was evidence of deliberate effort and measured precision. The reputation of the workshop grew slowly, built on consistency and the exacting standards Brent had established for himself. Standards that reflected not only skill but a moral discipline he had cultivated through years of solitude and reconstruction. Evan became an ever-present companion in the workspace, observing Brent's movements, absorbing methodical routines, and slowly internalizing lessons of patience, care, and responsibility. The boy learned the rhythm of tools, the cadence of repair, the attention to detail that turned effort into excellence. Each day offered small milestones: a successfully fitted carburetor, a panel aligned with minimal adjustment, a project completed without error. Brent noted these moments quietly, allowing them to accumulate as markers of growth, not only for Evan, but for the life they were shaping together. Brent no longer allowed the shadows of the past to intrude. Memories of Katy lingered only as faint outlines at the edge of thought, reminders of a life that had ended, but no longer demanded attention. His focus was entirely present, invested in the tangible, the weight of tools, the smell of motor oil, the echo of engines starting. The physicality of labor became intertwined with his sense of moral order, and in this structure he discovered a calm that had previously eluded him. Each morning began with deliberate planning. Tasks were assessed, priorities set, and the day unfolded according to a measured rhythm. Even challenges were approached with restraint. Mistakes were corrected with patience, setbacks analyzed without recrimination. Brent had learned to act without letting emotion dictate outcomes, to channel energy into creation rather than into conflict. The boundaries he maintained between past and present, between control and care, allowed him to operate with clarity, producing results that were precise, consistent, and meaningful. His emotional life, once raw and unstable, had achieved a quiet depth. Satisfaction no longer depended on external approval or fleeting victories. It emerged from the visible results of attention, discipline, and care. Brent found joy in the subtle indicators of growth around him. Evan's concentration on a delicate repair, the way he repeated precise movements, the pride visible in small accomplishments. Love in this new life was enacted through action, through deliberate guidance, and through the patient cultivation of order and skill. Words were unnecessary. The meaning was carried in care, in time invested, in shared effort. Brent's life had acquired a durable structure. The workshop was both sanctuary and arena, a place of work, teaching, and quiet fulfillment. Projects were completed with the precision of a practiced hand and the awareness of moral consequence. The boy's development, mirrored in meticulous restoration and careful attention to detail, became a central axis of Brent's purpose. Through daily labor and shared routine, he experienced a sense of completion previously unknown. The satisfaction of building rather than reacting, of shaping life rather than enduring it. By the close of the year, Brent had established a foundation that extended beyond the walls of the workshop. He had cultivated a life of discipline, care, and structured responsibility. The chaos of betrayal, the disorientation of sudden rupture, and the isolation of self-imposed exile had all been transformed into a coherent, purposeful existence. His days were filled with observable progress, emotional depth, and the quiet certainty that action could restore both order and meaning. In this new life, Brent had learned that resilience was not found in retaliation or avoidance, but in the deliberate construction of stability, the attentive nurturing of another, and the disciplined pursuit of mastery. Each project completed, each moment shared with Evan, each carefully considered decision reinforced the solidity of this foundation, and with it, the possibility of a life measured not by loss, but by careful, sustained creation.